other explorations like this, as you probably saw in the note where you were invited to this on the 15th of February. Chris Wooding from Ironwood Organic is going to be talking about ecological goods and services down on the farm as well. And that's sort of kind of a good segue to the talk that I'm doing tonight, I think. And then on March 22nd, Brian Henderson, who was the head gardener at Upper Canada Village for a number of years and also involved in all sorts of other things, is going to be doing a talk on heritage gardening, because at one of our properties up at Glen Elb, we're going to be putting in vegetable and flower gardens there that are about the era of Confederation of Canada. So back in the 1860s, heritage varieties of this, that, and the other thing for that. So hopefully that turns out to be kind of an interesting piece too. So anyways, the way this talk came about is sort of sideways. Dave Paul, who's listening in here, used to be the economic development officer of Brockville, and probably Brockville's secret weapon in terms of community growth back in those years, kind of the best years that Dave ever had. We managed to convince him to be involved with the Land Trust and become a board member. So last July, I think it was, or so, early July, Dave gave me a phone call and said, how would you like to talk to a nationwide conference of economic development people? And so if Dave says that's a good idea, then it's a good idea. And so we put our thinking caps on a little bit, and that's where this title, The Nature of the Economy, came from. It was Dave's suggestions really got me thinking that as we, in the news all the time, the planet's tottering towards the edge of precipices with climate change and biodiversity, that the one group that we really haven't perhaps engaged with enough as conservation organizations is the Economic Development Committee community. And so this talk is sort of stems from that talk. I did that back in October to a virtual conference of the Economic Development Association of Canada, and been thinking about it ever since. And so this evening, we're going to just explore locally tuned links to nature and the economy that the world needs now. And this talk is just a version of that one last October. So I'm going to do a little bit of screen share here now. Where is that? Which one is that? And my faithful assistant, Vanna, down here is bringing up the talk, which needs to be in full screen. So anyways, here we go. We'll get this right yet. Way over, I think. Yep. Nope. Click that button there. Okay, so on your screen, you should have an image that talks about the nature of the economy. And can everybody see that okay? Hands up if you do, just let me know. Okay, we're all set. Here we go. Okay, so first off, what I'd like to do is to acknowledge that we're working on a landscape to conserve the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe. And it's with the greatest respect that we work to protect nature here for all generations and all peoples. I've been a great fan of sustainable community development for quite some time. And I guess that really got driven home a lot in the years in working with the Frontenac Arch Biosphere, because that's the UNESCO mandate for all biosphere reserves, is sustainable community development. And it's really built on a 4-pillar model. And this one that's illustrated right here is from the city of Kingston, which the Frontenac Archbiosphere was involved in helping write this particular view of sustainable community development. It's 4-pillared. A lot of times people talk about sustainable development as a 3-pillared, 3-legged stool, but no matter what length those legs are on a 3-legged stool, it still stands up. With a 4-pillar model, it really involves a bit more balance, because if one of those legs of that table or chair happens to be a little bit shorter, it wobbles. And if they're out of balance altogether, it just won't stand up. And so that really helps bring into perspective, I think, a relationship between the economy and the environment. And you can't have healthy economies or environments either unless you've got a very healthy social and cultural community. And so that's kind of the part of the backbone of this. In the news of late, there's been overshadowing in some days the pandemic, although it seems to keep creeping into the foreground. A lot of things that have happened in terms of effects of climate change directly from weather events, it seems, you know, with flooding here and there, and warming issues, drought issues in some places, the massive wildfires of out west and in northern Ontario and so forth. And well, that tends to shadow a lot of the interesting discussion about climate change. It does help make it real, but climate change is such a gradual thing that it's a bit like the old boiling the frog bit, that you really don't feel it happening until something drastic comes along. But if we look into some pieces of literature and research, then there's ways to maybe make it a bit more real and to bring it home. These are some maps about how to see climate change effects of it a little bit. These are plant hardiness zones from 1970 on the left and basically today on the right. It's pretty easy to see how hardiness zones have been moving northward. And again, it's something that you don't really see because the world around you immediately doesn't reflect that. But at the same time, it really is real. And perhaps another way to express that is in terms of growing season, growing degree days, and how that's changed. And again, this kind of shows a little bit of a trend of what's happening. But if there's maybe one tree to tell the story, I'd pick on the trembling aspen, because this is a tree that grows coast to coast in Canada and the western and northern parts of the United States as well. And this is kind of what's been happening to the ideal growing zone of that particular tree. On the left, from 1971 to the year 2000 is the recorded range of that tree. And you'll see that it extends right into the region we're talking from here in southeastern Ontario. Lots of it there, but projected for 2071 to the year 2100, sort of a generation from now, is where that ideal growing range of that trembling aspen will be. And you notice that it doesn't actually show as a probable ideal range for it here in our area, even though there's lots of trembling aspens in this area right now. So, so things, they are changing. What have you got here, Martin? It's not changing now. Okay, so we thought from the Land Trust perspective, one way to talk about this, and yes, I will get to economy and so forth eventually. But one way to talk about this is to show how things can change a little bit. At our property up at Glen Elb there last June, with the help of the Leeds Grenville Stewardship Council, we created a bit of a strange arboretum. We call it a climate change arboretum, where we're taking advantage of being able to plant trees that are quite common in southwestern Ontario, the Niagara Peninsula, down through to the Carolinas and so forth, species of trees that are known from there, but really largely unknown from here. We're now in the same hardiness zone in this particular region as would have been seen in the Niagara Peninsula 30, 40 years ago. And so we planted a dozen or more species of trees there so far. As you see there, tulip, pawpaw, hackberry. Hackberry trees are in not too far away in northern New York State and over to Prince Edward County and so forth. Swamp white oak, there are some in this area, and black maple is actually doing very, very well. It was sort of a marginal tree a little while ago, but there's actually quite a bit of it prospering and growing great seedlings here now. So we invited people to help plant those trees, and dozens and dozens of people came along to do it. And everybody talked about it being a little bit of an eye opener to see things that were strange now growing in their own backyard. We're going to carry that on. This spring, we're going to plant quite a few more, and it's going to become a little bit more of something that we do. So there is climate change, but climate change is really a result of the way that we've changed the parameters of climate, namely the world around us. So there was a really interesting article that popped up in the December 2020 issue of the scientific journal called Nature. And there's a few interesting facts that came along from that. Ooh, somebody else wants.
Calder's going to let
Oh, Calder's letting me. Thanks, Calder. All righty. Anyways, so this is a strange looking illustration, but it's to say that right now, all things man-made outweigh every living thing on the planet. And that's plants to plankton, bacteria to birds, earthworms and elephants. So all of those things that we've created out of the goods from the natural world around us are now heavier, if you put them on two sides of a scale, than all living things combined. And oops, now it's not changing again here. Thank you, Vanna. Oh, it went too far. Can we go back? Okay. The another interesting little bit about that is when you look at the weight of mammals on Earth, all just looking at mammals in this particular case, humans weigh 36% of that mass of mammals. Livestock, everything grown in fenced-in areas and so forth, all of the things that are on our food production table kind of a thing, weigh about 60% of all the mammals on Earth. And all other mammals, that's elephants and whales and giraffes and white-tailed deer and coyotes, red foxes, squirrels and mice and everything like that make up 4% of the weight of mammals on Earth. That's quite a change. The poultry, if we look at that, poultry being turkeys, ducks, geese, quail, all of those pen-raised birds that we know, weigh 3 times as much now as all the wild birds on Earth. So there's been just quite a considerable change in the way the world is. And so it's no surprise then when you begin to look at things like that, that there's it ain't the same planet. And the climate change is really one of the spin-offs of the way that the world's been changed. We talk a lot about carbon emissions and things like that, but that's really another byproduct of everything that we've been doing. And so carbon has become the the bullseye to target, but it's really far, far more than that. And this has been really realized a lot by science. And a lot of countries are trying to do something about it. Aichi is a community in Japan where a convention on biodiversity was held just a few years back, and 120 countries, including Canada and the US and so forth, signed on to goals to protect natural spaces that were left on the planet. And the goal when they first started that out was to try to reach 17% of terrestrial areas with some kind of conservation measures and 11% of marine environments. So how are we doing on that anyhow? Well, it's a great sort of target, but Canada's really struggled to get to 12%. Ontario is the laggard of all of the provinces in Canada at just barely 9%. To bring that home locally, here in this particular area where we're also used to seeing so many trees and everything around, we're really only at protecting 5% of the natural spaces of the 1,100 square kilometers, at least that this land trust works in, the Thousand Isles Watershed Land Trust works in. And that's 5%, including the area of the National Park, Charleston Lake Provincial Park, all the Conservation Authority lands, all the lands that the land trusts ourselves, Ontario Nature and Nature Conservancy hold, as well as all the lands that are zoned environmental protection. 5% is not very much. It's a long ways to go. And so to do a little bit better than that, we have to, I think, begin to look a little bit deeper into ways that we can tackle it. So how's things look in terms of critical habitats coast to coast? The Nature Conservancy of Canada, about this time last year, did an assessment of the health and well-being and the risk levels, you might say, of natural spaces in southern Canada, easiest one for them to look at. So this is a strange abbreviated looking map, Canada, but if you have a look into this, the red zones on there, don't they kind of look familiar? Wasn't that some of those areas that also showed up as heavily changed in terms of hardiness zones and so forth? It really does. Anyways, so there are crisis ecoregions, and this area of southeastern Ontario, as well as the southern parts of the three prairie provinces and some of Vancouver Island, all show up as being areas that are in crisis. Look a little bit closer at the east end of Lake Ontario and those three pink dots. Atop these crisis areas also happen to be priority sites for species or conservation concerns for species at risk. And so we just happen to be falling into a crisis area with priority areas as far as that science goes. The number of species at risk because of habitat loss, a kind of an overlap map of this shows up right here. And again, there's the same kind of areas that show up as priorities, no surprise from the Nature Conservancy's map. But ask you to remember that Southern Ontario red zone, because we're going to come back to that in a few minutes. This is kind of where we change gears a little bit into talking about the ecosystem services side of things. And ecosystem services are services of nature as opposed to goods from nature. A good out of nature would be materials that are mined, it would be gas or oil that would be drilled for, it would be fish we fish for, trees we cut down and so forth. Those are all goods out of nature. Services instead are a little bit different, ecosystem services. And we'll just have a look at those because all of these anyways and so forth. But there's pollination. And when we think of pollination, we often think of bees and honey. Well, honey is a good. Pollination was the service. In natural spaces, there's dozens and dozens and dozens of species of wild bees, and each one of those is a specialist that are involved with particular plants. Not all plants use bees for pollinators. There's also wind involved in pollination, and so that comes into play as well. But things like insects can actually provide an ecological service for us. Water storage and recharge, boy, this past year has been brought home a whole lot in terms of the value of wetlands and forest lands and any kind of cover that works as a sponge on the landscape. The water storage part of it for both flood abatement and also recharge for seasons of drought that would come into play. You know, in Ontario, we've lost 85% of our wetlands. There's only 15% left out of all of that. So we're running a bit of a deficit in terms of those natural recharge spaces. Forests have all kinds of benefit. It's not just the trees that we build houses out of. They actually are HEPA filters, if you will, kind of thing. There are air filters sucking up all kinds of things that flow across the airscape of the regions. They dampen storms because they moderate temperatures. They have a carbon storage potential that's absolutely massive. And so healthy forests are pretty critical as an ecological service provider on many, many fronts. And often overlooked in equations, but maybe should be front of mind more these days, is well-being. That with the COVID pandemic and in the news, tremendous amount, is the fact that people are suffering mentally quite a bit from lack of contact, kids staying home from school and learning online and not socializing. It's really quite a critical thing. An ecological service out of nature is actually a contribution to our own well-being. Well, where's that going again? Sometimes we kind of lose the button for some reason. Yeah, let's do that. No. Okay, well, make yourselves at home. Pour another drink. Okay, we got it again. Here we go. Nope.
No, it should be here. Okay.
All right. Anyways, we tend to realize, I think, that we may have services that are worth a lot of money, but I think the thing that we need to learn is that they're just not free. We should really be considering these kinds of services and where they come from. Where they come from is really green infrastructure. And it's not just the highest thing on the list of investments in economic development these days. It's pretty darned easy to think about building roads and highways and water sewage treatment plants and water filtration plants and that kind of a thing. But you can create those. You can't create nature, but all you can do is to conserve what you've got in order to keep those services going, because they are just not replaceable other than by nature itself. So there was a really interesting case study about ecological services that the City of New York learned. This goes back to the year 2000. And back then, the Big Apple was facing quite a bit of a drinking water crisis. the quality of the waterways that feeds New York were deteriorating. And I don't know if you realize this, New York City had never relied on and still does not rely on a water treatment plant for its drinking water. They actually are one of those mega cities that learned to look upstream for its water. And so what they did was kind of interesting. They realized that to build a water treatment plant at New York City for New York City was going to be in year $2000, $10 billion bucks. It's a lot of cash. So instead, what they said was, well, where'd our water come from? And they looked upstream and realized that the problem was actually allowing that water system that was delivering to them to deteriorate. So instead, they diverted $1 billion, a lot of money at the time, into quite a novel approach of buying back waterfronts along critical reservoirs and rivers upstream in 3 of the major tributary areas to New York City. And they protected those reservoirs with conservation easements, prohibitions of development, buying back and restoring waterfronts and so forth there with that money. So they not only saved themselves about another $9 billion in building a plant, they saved all of those ongoing operating costs as well. So the Catskills and southern part of the Adirondacks that feed New York City's water system supply have been protected, and on the way they've gained or regained recreational space as well as that service that nature was supplying, doing all their filtering for them. We don't always have to look a long ways away to find those sorts of things. This is a picture of the northeast corner of Brockville in 1994, back before they actually had colored satellites, I guess. So if you're not that familiar with the area, the double black striped diagonally across the lower right-hand corner is Highway 401, and that's the North Augusta exit up there. And the area that we're focusing on is that sort of scrubby, fieldy looking place in more or less the center of the frame. At one time, that was kind of a low-lying area full of basswood and black ash and all kinds of swamp-grown trees, winterberry and that kind of a thing. The trees were cut, was left as basically a big grassy swale with cattails and patches here and there and that kind of a thing. And it looked pretty darn useless, from one point of view. So when there was a proposal to build a major shopping center there, what better place to supply than this kind of unusable piece of land, it seemed, up in that corner of Brockville. But then right after that was built, in a summer right after that, we had one of those mega storms that you folks have seen pour through here once in a while, where it just rained cats and dogs. And before you knew it, all the cars in that big parking lot there were up to their axles and doors in a pond that deep, an asphalt bottom pond, because the rain had really nowhere to go. There were storm drains, couldn't handle it, just way too much for the infrastructure. And so circled in red right there, do you see that thing that looks like an oven mitt at the end of a canoe paddle? That's a water storage pond. That was a solution. Do you know what that pond did, of course, was to replace that former scrubby field in terms of its water storage potential. And so you can actually put a cost then on what that ecological service was worth to the city, because taxpayers went on the hook for over $1 million. to create that storage pond out there and for all of that water. So you can put values on ecological services, and should really be part of an economic development equation, is thinking about what's upstream and how it affects you downstream, whether it's airstreams or whatever. It's not all in terms of water, but food comes into the equation as well as a benefit of ecological services. And down on the farm, we're just taking a look here at the difference between earth and dirt. Earth is really what's quite healthy, full of nutrients, organic matter, and can hold quite a bit of moisture. And dirt, on the other hand, so to speak, there is what you have without all of those extra ingredients involved. And so what's interesting about that is that we can also look at ecological services on farmland, not necessarily just in wetlands and grasslands and forests and so forth, but very much a part of the ecological equation. Farms can work into that, and I say can work into that. Healthy loam and clay soils contain about 6 or 7% organic matter. And if that soil is respected and with best practices in farming and balances of resting periods and avoiding compaction and so forth, you can actually keep quite a bit of moisture in soil. And if you can keep that together, you can have, you'll know that you'll have a significant amount of organic matter in there, which means that you really don't have to be supplying as much fertilizer on that land. But if you work that land out, what would you rather eat? Crops grown off of that, your fruits and vegetables that were grown on natural nutrients and nutrient-rich soil, or would you rather eat fertilized dirt? It's kind of what it boils down to. Now then, every 1% of that organic matter in the soil can hold about 75,000 liters of water per acre. Now there I go mixing metric and imperial, but that's what I do. Anyways, 75,000 liters of water per acre. So if we took say a 100-acre field with, let's say, a 5% organic matter, that would hold, that means that 1 acre could hold enough water to fill 300 of those TC-111 oil-carrying tankers that we all sit around rail crossings waiting to pass, So imagine what would happen, and it is happening, if there weren't that much organic matter in that soil, or that soil was lost to parking lots or whatever, those acres, and the lack of that water storage ability has to go somewhere, goes downstream. And we've seen the effects of that kind of flooding over and over again on newscasts, and even locally. The Gan River sometimes just rages downstream, and it's a muddy stream carrying all kinds of soil lost forever out into the St. Lawrence. And so another service of nature really is high organic content in soils. So agriculture can really be a part of an equation that's also involved in keeping and restoring nature on the land, other ecological services. 3 of the properties that the Land Trust has now has active hayfields. There's also a property with pasture on it and so forth. And working with the farmers there, that we get to do the hay for us to keep those hayfields going, be part of the local economy, is actually keeping a grassland intact in the area. And grasslands used to be one of the features of this landscape. We used to have oak savannas, and even Champlain commented in one of his diaries that as he passed Kingston, that it had some of the finest grasslands as you'd see in France, out on the Lemoyne Peninsula there at Kingston. And so they're not something that's foreign to this region, but we've kind of stopped thinking about grasslands. And so we've lost a lot of the inhabitants of those, like the bobolink and the meadowlark pictured there, for example, nesting and hanging out on our 3 grassland properties and so forth, because the hay is taken off a little bit later in the season to allow them to fledge. The hedgerows that are surrounding the fields are also super duper important because they contribute significantly. They reduce wind strength blowing over fields, and therefore they reduce the amount of wind throw in grain crops. They help keep a bit of a moisture dome over some of those field areas. They harbor predators against insects that would otherwise be gobbling crops a little bit more. Birds and bats that are there are actually friendly to agriculture. And so there's quite a bit of benefit to those. And so there's actually a connection between what we're doing as land trusts and what we hope that we can talk to the Economic Development Committee and thinking about, because we've really been talking in the last few slides about green infrastructure. Why wouldn't we make investments in green infrastructure? You can't create it, but you can help support what's there. So it comes a lot into what we should be thinking about. Well-being in green space, to come back to that again. As a bunch of you know, I used to have a sporting goods store in Brockville, and we sold all kinds of things from kayaks to hiking boots and cross-country skis and things like that. And during the pandemic, I think we missed a big sales event because people discovered the great outdoors and flocked there in droves. They became the crowded spaces in a sense. And perhaps we would have done well with that because the run on hiking boots was amazing. If anybody tried to order a bicycle during the pandemic, they found you were on a waiting list of months and months long, and you couldn't always get what you want, as they used to say in a song, apparently. So that is really kind of a important part of it too, that health and well-being that people gain from being in those natural spaces. So let's come back a little bit to some costing analysis of ecological services then. Remember, I asked you to remember that red space of southwestern Ontario? Well, here it is in green. This actually turns out to be the smallest forest region in Canada that's been highlighted, not by any sort of scientific analysis design, but in terms of it actually having its own identifiable character as the mixed wood forest plain, it's called. It's just 2% of the region of Canada. And this is the area that we're working in as the land trust. Some of the folks on the call here, Cam and Emily and Brian and Steve Nechtal out there, I think, was on the call. Remember working back in the mid 2000 era, 2005, 7, 8, 9 kind of a thing on a pioneering kind of a project that worked to figure out how to identify and classify water land cover types in Ontario. It was really a groundbreaking piece of work with a lot of intensive field work done with the goal of being able to feed data into a computer program that could be used with satellite images to identify on a broader scale what the cover types were in particular areas. So this is that mixed wood forest plain, the Ontario portion of it, because this was done in conjunction with Ministry of Natural Resources and Forest now of the time. Brown is agricultural land, green is forest cover, basically. Blue, intuitively, is water, and red is some of that developed and unidentifiable, undifferentiated space. And so M&R in the publishing piece of this looked at an area around Toronto. That's what's in the square. But if you look over to the right and to East End of Lake Ontario, I'm just trying to see if my cursor works here, but it doesn't to show you. But anyways, that bright green spot is the Frontenac Arch biosphere, and basically the region that we live in and where the Land Trust is working and so forth. Look at all the green space of this smallest forest region of Canada. It's in the Bruce Peninsula, a ribbon across the green belt, and the darkest of the greens, it just happens to be over where we are in this neck of the woods. So in terms of how much cover is left in terms of green space, you know, folks, it's really not a whole lot in Southern Ontario. So to put some dollars on it, there were a group of economists that got engaged in this from Harvard and from McGill University and others. And they spent about a year and a half going through all kinds of tables of data of what services could be valued at of nature. You know, these are those things, again, like pollination, water storage and recharge, recreational space, health and well-being, and all that kind of a thing, and came up with this particular map. There's Toronto again in that same box. Now, if you can't quite make out the numbers on the screen, the greens are basically, you know, forest space. And if you look at our region again, right there, that darker green area, it's valued anywhere from basically $50 to $200 per 15 meter by 15 meter space. That's not really big space. You know, that's under 50 feet by 50 feet for those of you so inclined for feet. Anyways, that's pretty high value for a small space like that on the landscape. But look how it fits around urban areas like Toronto. Those purple colors down there, they're worth, you know, like $1,000, $2,000 per 15 by 15 meter space. But interestingly, right next to that is white space. It's worth nothing because there's really no service of nature on that entirely built over landscape. But if you go to the edge of the built area where people are closest to nature, then those ecosystem service values rank really, really high because they're of value in this sort of a case in terms of economy to people. This is services again. It's not goods. It's how many people can get close to nature. The closer people can get, the more valuable nature seems to be. Wouldn't it be nice if all of those people could access nature without having to destroy it in the process? So let's burrow into the table of values a little bit here. If you can see this, there's that agriculture category right at the top. And agriculture in this case means basically agriculture other than the grasslands and pastures and hayfields and so forth that are right underneath the main agricultural thing. Isn't that interesting that the services valued for nature actually rank higher on a hayfield than they do on a piece of ground that would be growing tomatoes or corn or soybeans? Again, those pseudo grassland areas have a higher value for ecological system services, water storage, pollination, bird watching, let's say, and all things combined with that. Forests, non-urban ranked less than forest urban. That kind of reflects what we were talking about with the purple versus green areas in the slide beforehand, and so forth all the way down the list. That these are values per hectare, or a hectare is really about 2.47 acres to translate that. And so the bottom line in the lower right-hand corner is back in 2009 dollars, an ecological services benefit to this part of Ontario annually of over $84 billion. That's a lot of money in terms of if you were thinking about making investments equivalently in other infrastructure projects. But here is um, an infrastructure that's green, providing us services that we don't value. But if you tried to figure out what you'd lose by not having them, you'd actually be losing that $84 billion plus. So what would that be in today's dollars, do you think? 84 billion in 2009 versus 2022. It's almost a trick question because we're losing those natural spaces that provide those ecological services to us at a pretty significant rate. There's things in the news every day about some major developments, another subdivision growing on the outside of the city over here, strip development down that road over there, and so forth. So we may not actually have a value that's left that high today. It's really hard to say, and unless somebody wanted to try to duplicate that. So again, we're really talking about what we should maybe be talking more about in terms of the value of green infrastructure and economic development scenarios. Now, from a land trust point of view, I think we've got a lot to add in that equation because all the land trusts, and you know what, there's 148 land trusts across Canada and about 9,000 people involved. But anyways, here in this particular one, we've been working with some tremendous landowner heroes over the bunch of years. And here's a few of them right there. And by golly, there's a couple of folks on these slides that are actually listening in this evening. These folks are real heroes because they've given up some properties to the land trust. They probably could have sold for a whack of money, but instead they're really providing these natural spaces that provide those ecological services for all the people of Canada and adjacent United States. So it's possible for economic development, I think, if they considered partnering with organizations like land trusts and other conservation organizations on the landscape that have a means and a wherewithal to protect land into perpetuity, that forever thing that's our slogan, would be money really, really well spent because it avoids spending money elsewhere. The cost of mental health is significant. The cost of taking care of people for water and air quality issues is really quite significant. That all involves building a different kind of infrastructure than the one that's out there where the services are for free, but we're gobbling up those services as we go. So we think it's especially important in this region. You've all heard the folks from the Algonquin to Adirondacks Collaborative talk about this being the area that connects the Canadian Shield to the Adirondack Dome. That's significant because here we are at the two in the A to A, if you wish, where it's the narrow neck of that hourglass, one of the last places in Eastern North America where there still is a migration highway that would allow these movements of these plants and animal ranges in climate change. You're remembering those first slides we showed of hardiness zones and species at risk areas and so forth. So everyone involved around here, and so many of you have been terrific contributors to the Land Trust over the 30 years now that we've been in existence, and helping keep some of these natural pieces of infrastructure in place. But then we go back again by the hard numbers. There's only 5% that's protected so far, and that's a pretty significant number to work on protecting. Our area is the south half of this funny looking thing on the landscape, which actually is the shape that formed the Frontenac Arch biosphere. And here are those protected spaces on the landscape. Sorry that the Conservation Authority properties aren't there, but the darker green ones are current land trust holdings. That represents, when you look at it, about 2,700 acres of area. There's Charleston Lake Provincial Park there, 6,200 acres. There's the National Park down on the front, just a little bit smaller than Charleston Lake in total when you add up all their holdings and so forth. But put it all together, that's what 5% on the landscape looks like when we're talking about an area that is the green oasis of the Canadian landscape and really needs that. So as we look into the future, I think it behooves us and you folks, because you would play a huge part in this, in talking to people that are in the planning and development communities that you're aware of, about the importance of green infrastructure and the role that nature plays in the economy. So that essentially brings me to the end of my particular